Hi, my name is Juliet Selgren, and this is my podcast, The Great Antidote. This podcast has been brought to you by the Center for Growth and Opportunity at Utah State University. To learn more, visit www.thecgo.org. Welcome back. It is my pleasure to have Matt Welch on today. I have been a Matt Welch fan for a long time, so for me, this is great. He's an editor-at-large at Reason, the libertarian magazine of, quote, free minds and free markets, end quote. He served as Reason's editor-in-chief from 2008 to 2016, and he's the co-author, along with Nick Gillespie, of the 2011 book, The Declaration of Independence, How Libertarian Politics Can Fix What's Wrong with America. Hi, Matt. Welcome.
Hi. It's great to hear you, and just to think everyone should know. I didn't quite know you when you were in diapers, but I knew you when you were a tiny little person. And that makes me really happy to be talking. I wouldn't have guessed that I'd be talking to you on a podcast when I first met you, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still a pretty tiny person, but I'm an adult now, technically. So I feel like I'm still a kid. That's okay. Yeah, I also can't drink, so there's that. So I'm not really an adult, I guess, until I'm 21.
Wait, don't you have a French passport? Different rules.
No, sadly, I don't have a French passport because I just don't.
Okay.
France is crazy. Kidding, not really. So what is the most important thing that people my age or in my generation should know that we don't?
That it's not too late. It's never too late to do fill in the blank. I have this distinct memory when I was a kid, like 7, 8 years old, max. I grew up in Long Beach, California in the 1970s. For those of you who cannot picture that, just go watch the Bad News Bears and treat it as a documentary. That's kind of like what that was like. And I have this memory of going to the beach and seeing kids my age and maybe a little bit older surfing, standing up on a surfboard, which is not easy to do. And those guys are always like super cool looking and they're kind of arrogant. And I couldn't stand a surfboard. And I had this thought, which I will never forget, which is like, you know what? It's just too late to learn surfing. I'm too old. I was like 8, because these kids are my age and they were like shredding on the waves. And you can fake yourself out. You can get in this mindset like I'm too old to do X, and it's too late to change this one behavior that I have. At some point we all start putting the cap on the toothpaste instead of just leaving it on the sink. I don't know. You're not a dude, so maybe you didn't go through this, but like you can do, as we were taught in Frozen 2, you can always do the next right thing, a small little thing to change the trajectory of your own personal behavior, your happiness or sadness, certainly your career. I picked up a guitar for the first time when I was 17. There's some guitar lying around, and I remember back then thinking, it's probably too late to play guitar. I was in a band at the time. I was a singer, and all these guys were, super shredding lead guitarists who were teenagers. And I could have treated this like it's too late to, of course, to begin to do that. But it was fun to work out and play on 2 strings at the same time. And what happens is that without faking myself out with the it's too late thing, I got good enough playing on guitar that I've made records playing guitar. So like the impatience of youth is really important, and also the uncertainty of it can propel you to achieve and to do stuff. You don't really know how life's going to work out, and that's all fine and good, but don't let it get to you to a place where you just sort of feel like you're at a dead end and there's no possibility of doing something new and wonderful in the future. There always is.
Okay, lots of things. First, I didn't watch Frozen 2, but I can learn from what you said. I guess I will watch it later. I don't know. eventually. It's not too late. I will watch it.
See,
Also, I picked up the guitar when I was 17.
cool.
So funny. Also, can I listen to these records? Do they exist? Are they on the internet?
A couple of them are. So I was the rhythm guitar player and backup singer of a band called Ken Lane and the Corvids. And that stuff, I believe, is all on Spotify and on YouTube and Amazon and stuff. There's two records. One is called Fought Down, and the other one is called golly, I even forget something trans civilization or something like that. I forget. But yeah, so I'm playing rhythm guitar and singing backups, and a couple of those songs I co-wrote. And you can hear me yelping and playing on other things. I have a SoundCloud, as the kids do, not the kids. And you can hear some of the kind of home recordings that I did over the years, and so
Ooh.
I made a couple of like cassettes when I lived in Prague, and so I kind of cleaned up a couple of songs from those, and they're up there. You can listen to.
It's not too late, everyone. If Matt Welch can do it, you can probably do it too.
Probably do it better. Exactly.
I don't know better. You're a pretty cool dude. But that's cool. I'm gonna give that a listen. Everybody, give that a listen also. That will be cool. Okay. Before we actually start, I also want to talk to you about this other thing. So your Twitter recently retweeted a guy who said he liked the pandemic song Zen by Ex Ambassadors with K Flay and Grandson. I showed this to my mom. She thought it was so funny that there's an artist named Grandson. Um, I'm not sure if this tweet means you like it or not, so I kind of just want clarification.
Somebody had sent that to me, who tweeted it at me and said, "Hey, look, most pandemic songs suck," which I think is accurate, or at least the ones that I've heard. And he's like, "But I think that you like this one. That's really good." And he did, and I did like it, so I retweeted it because I liked it. In this case, the RT was an endorsement.
Interesting. How about Van Morrison's anti-lockdown song?
I think I heard that just the one time, and I was listening to it more as sort of just appreciating how he's being angry old man Van Morrison, more than I was particularly paying attention to it. There was the Rolling Stones had an anti-lockdown song, or just sort of a lockdown-ish song that wasn't that good. But then Mick Jagger and Dave Grohl did one that was released like last week that I kind of liked, just because it sort of sounded like the Stones. But if I was rating it objectively, I probably wouldn't say that it was all that great. So this other one is the best one that I've heard so far.
Nice. Thank you for your input. Okay, so on the topic of Twitter feed, you have a great Twitter feed. Lots of music, articles about musicians. How many people has Keith Richards outlived? I thought that was funny. And lots of baseball. You are a
Yes.
Los Angeles Angels fan, right?
Correct.
I'm not a sports person really. I don't follow sports. So I looked this up. I said, "Are they any good?" First one, yes, best team ever. Second one, worst team ever. You should hate them. And I was
Mhm.
like, "What?" So are they good?
This year they're playing. They got off to one of their best starts that they have in their 60-year history. That's also kind of a tallest dwarf category too, since a lot of their history they were a really mediocre team, including when I was first following them when I was a little tot. My dad had season tickets. But they might be pretty good this year. They have one of the best players who's ever played baseball on the team, named Mike Trout, who's been there for 10 years. He plays in the style that's reminiscent of Mickey Mantle, who's one of the all-time greats in the game. And they have a player from Japan who's very exciting and athletically monstrous, named Shohei Ohtani, sort of the Japanese Babe Ruth. And so they're fun to watch. They haven't been a good team for basically 10 years, 10 years, which is it makes me sad. But they're more entertaining and they have a better chance to be good this year. And I should say, we're recording this on April 23rd, I think, on a Thursday. I haven't
22nd.
had 22nd. I haven't had access to my Twitter account in 10 days. At Matt Welch, I fell victim to a stupid hack, and I haven't been able to retrieve it. So if you go and listen to this very nice recommendation of my Bizarro World little Twitter account, and you wonder why there hasn't been anything updated since April 12th, that's because I got hacked and I can't get back in yet. So it's sad. If you want to, fill in the blanks in the meantime, go to Alt Welch, where I do a lot of the same stupid things.
Nice. Thank you for that. Well, listeners, you heard it here. Matt Welch got hacked. So Reason's slogan is free minds and free markets. Can you tell my listeners what that means?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's just like for those of you who grew up in the Catholic Church, you just or any church probably, you sort of say the same things over and over again. That you lose kind of a relationship with it. So that can happen to slogans as well. But I've always liked it: free minds and free markets, and also in that order. In that there was an aspiration from the beginning, from the founder, who was like a 20-year-old college student named Lanny Friedlander, who's
That's cool.
a bit of a wow. He did it like literally in his mom's basement in Boston. He was like me. I think he was a dropout. I was a college expellee. They kicked me out. But he was a design genius, but also a really interesting thinker. I wrote a big feature on him, and we did the Reason TV people did a wonderful video about it that came out last month, I think, that I recommend people check out, about this guy, because he founded a lasting, interesting magazine at age 20, and he basically disappeared at 25, and almost no one heard from him since. And he died in a group home for veterans who have mental issues. Although we did get in contact with him before he died, so that was pretty cool and sort of reconnected. But anyways, free minds and free markets. I've always taken the minds part to be as interesting and attractive as an outsider, as a consumer of the magazine, because it's sort of like, how can we just begin by kind of decoding or giving people a different framework about the news and information and culture that we're otherwise consuming. The very first editor's note from Lanny Friedlander in May 1968, when this thing was started, a couple of months before I was born, he has this great little like mini manifesto of like, it's going to be logic and not legends, assertion of argument, not assertion. It's going to find, you have to lead with the mind stuff first. And in the book that Nick Gillespie and I co-wrote, Declaration of Independence, yes, it was about the rise of political independence with the TS as a category of people in America, and so what that means for politics and policy. But also it was sort of an argument for that way of going through life, especially as it intersects with policy. Like, you don't have to belong to a tribe. And in fact, when you don't, and that includes the libertarian tribe, I hasten to add, or any other like micro tribe within it, you don't have to belong to a team and then therefore like carry water for that team or look the other way when that team does something bad, and also rally reliably to fight the team's opponent. You don't have to do that. And when you don't do that, when you sort of step back and declare independence from that type of approach, the world opens up to you in pretty interesting ways. And so I've always taken the free minds and free markets stuff to be about that. The free markets for me is, what markets and everything, as your mother would certainly remind us of, that like what happens when people are allowed to exchange with one another, absent of heavy central planning or the heavy hand of someone telling them what they cannot do. It's remarkable. Markets just show up. There's literally markets in everything. We're on the Reason Slack channel, and hopefully I'm not giving too much away when I say this, but someone pointed out just today, linking to a story about how post-vaccine women are selling their breast milk online because I guess there's some, it's safer for people, for women who haven't been vaccinated yet. Who knows? Whatever. I haven't looked at it, but the little message he sent along with it was markets and everything. And he's right. And like, it's great. As someone who lived in post-communist countries right after they switched, right? I moved to Czechoslovakia in 1990, 9 months after they overthrew communism. I saw firsthand the wreckage and the residue of what happens when you don't allow for free markets. And what happens is it's not just about like economics and business. It's actually about life. It's that the government is going to tell you, it's going to approve your band name or not, and tell you that your set list is okay, but don't play that cover song, or tell you you can't play in that venue. Like it's the amount of totalizing control over your life is awful. So free minds and free markets, like open your mind to information, but also recognize the responsibility that you've got to engage in good faith factual arguments while doing so. And then also free markets. You know, it's better and glorious to see what happens when people have the freedom to exchange and create and do whatever the hell they want to do.
I like that. What was it like kind of to see that? To see the like post-communism? Did you see people adapting to a world without that? Or was there kind of like a gap in people's mind where they were like, wait, are we allowed to do this? Like, how did that, I don't know, how did people interact with the world following that?
Well, the first thing they did is they made out with the world, kind of literally. So I showed up there when I was 22, and Prague it's literally the capital of Bohemia, right? Bohemia is one of the main regions of the Czech Republic. The Bohemia is the, I guess, province or region. I forget what they call it. Prague is the capital of Bohemia. So it was always a place that always, except for the awful 40 years between 1948 and 1989, was always at the intersection of crazy culture, art, and international mixing. It's the town of Franz Kafka, who wrote, I believe, in German. There was it was a German, it was Jewish, gypsies, Czech, Slovak, Hungarian, just all over the world. There was always this bohemian spirit there that was choked off very artificially. So what happens when things open back up is two things. One is, this is really hard to explain or describe in its totality, but you're how old now? You're 18, 19?
18.
You're 18. Okay. So until I was 21, I grew up in a world in which I knew two things were true. One is that nothing ever happened.
Mm-hmm.
History was locked in place. Because like I kind of came blinking awake to the current events around me, maybe starting around 1976. So it was after the Vietnam War. It had missed Watergate and all the tumult. So history was something that you always look back at, and especially towards the 1960s, which seemed like this crazy, convulsive time. And like everything was in stasis. It just didn't seem like nothing was happening. And especially because of the Cold War. Cold War made it so that half of Europe was just a big black blotch. No one went there unless you like were really, really sort of brave, thrill-seeking traveler, or you were some kind of journalist that were allowed to go. But generally speaking, nobody went. Nobody had any idea what happened over there. I had been living in Czechoslovakia for more than a month when someone had to explain to me, Slovakia is a whole different thing, right? Like with a language. I'm like, what? No. Why would I know that? I'm American. But more importantly, you didn't know that because that whole map was dark. And so what happened is that all these Westerners, especially around my age, just flooded into it and said, holy cow, this place is awesome. It's beautiful. Prague is, it's one of the only European capitals to never really get bombed at any given time through a strategic cowardice, either by themselves or by the international community. And so you have more than 1,000 years of uninterrupted, crazy architecture along this river. So it's incredible, beautiful. It has this bohemian spirit. And at the time, and even still now, but to a much lesser degree, it was like the cheapest place in the world. You could buy beer for 10 cents, and it was the best beer in the world. And so we were having a pretty fun time, but so were the people who were opening up, especially the people exactly my age, exactly your age now. We met all these people between the ages of 18 and 22 who they were the ones who propelled the revolution in 1989. It was students. It was a student-led revolution. It was when students protested against the wishes of their parents who had gone through it themselves when they were students in 1968. And the Soviets, the Warsaw Pact, brutally suppressed their movements towards freedom, and had a really profound impact on world events. Then, so the parents were like, "No, don't do it. We see how this ends. It's terrible." The students said, "We're students. We're going to do what we want." On November 17th of 1989, and the cops cracked down and clubbed a bunch of heads, and the parents got really pissed off, and they went out the next day, and within a couple of days, it was 100,000, it was 1,000,000 people, and within 14 days, essentially, the end of November, that was it. Government resigned without a shot being fired. It was amazing. And it was students who led it. And it wasn't just, the students who protested in downtown Prague, although it was definitely them, but it was also like during the events of November, and I met a lot of these people who became lifelong friends to this day, who if they were in their little town 100 miles from Prague, in fact, had never set foot in Prague, they heard what was going on through the student grapevine. And so they'd fan out in buses and they would go talk in factories to the workers in their blue overalls and say, "Hey, look, the revolution is happening now. Here's what we're doing. Here's what the students say. Here's what's on the grapevine. We need your support. Let's do this. There's going to be a general strike on this day." It was a student-run revolution. So part of my desire of going there was just to hang out people with my age who had just overthrown a communist government. That sounded pretty cool. And a lot of those kids flooded into Prague because they wanted to meet foreigners, because the place had been there weren't foreigners. No one spoke English. So it was a time for a lot of making out and just sort of the intersection of people rediscovering one another. So especially around people my age from there and coming in, it was marvelous because like the old system had collapsed and the new one hadn't been built yet. And there was a lot of like anarchic possibility there and just incredibly creative, weirdo art taking place. I recommend people go look up a guy named David Cherny, and you spell that last name Cerny with funny little diacritical marks on the C and on the Y. He's an artist. He's probably exactly my age. And he started doing crazy, huge stunts of art even before communism collapsed. But, he would put gigantic dinosaur legs on a Trabant, which is their local crappy communist car, and put it in the middle of Old Town Square. He painted a Soviet tank pink with a gigantic middle finger on the top of it in a memorial, which caused a gigantic international incident. He's got a great website, but go noodle around that. He embodied the sort of spirit there that was happening, especially among people of a certain age. I think to the spirit of your question, like what was it like for the older people? It was terrifying, right? Like the world that they grew up in changed so dramatically overnight. For the most part, people were happy, but because you could talk to people, you could speak your mind. I mean, Czechoslovakia had one of the most totalitarian of the communisms, along with East Germany and Romania and Albania. They're really some of the worst police states. So people were kind of fearfully coming back out, and there's a great unsettled sense of reckoning of what do you do? Like, how do you deal with the people from the former regime? How do you deal with the property that had been seized by various governments at various times? How do you handle restitution? All of these things that all the countries of that region had to deal with. So the change, the velocity of change is just so unsettling, so much faster than anything that we ever really experienced in America, which had a pretty profound effect on me, just seeing people's capacity to deal with it, and also how like soft we all are in comparison, because we didn't have to go through it. But it was it obviously put a huge stamp on me and on my life. And I was lucky enough with some friends from who I'd worked with at the college newspaper at UC Santa Barbara to start a newspaper. So it was the first independent post-communist English language newspaper in the whole region. So that, obviously had just a huge effect on the trajectory of my life.
That's fascinating. And mostly because I've never learned about it. I was not aware that I know in general like Europe was kind of this like weird black hole that no one really knew about because like there was so much stuff going on, but I didn't know that there were countries other than like the USSR or like China that had like this sort of thing. I mean, I know the associated countries kind of did, but we never really learned that sort of stuff. So for me, that's fascinating, but also just the idea of being there. It seems, I don't know, the way you're telling it, it's like so vibrant. Like, I want to feel that. I want to see that and like feel the energy from like the youth there. I don't know. It just seems so cool.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say that for in that direction, I used to be asked this a lot when I came back to the United States. In 1998 when I was nearly 30 years old, and I was like trying to figure out how to live here, which was not easy. And people would say, "Well, like, what's the next Prague?" Because Prague became quite the destination for travelers. And I would always say, like, I don't freaking know. Why are you asking me? But also, like, whatever it is, especially if you're young, go find it. Your legs work better when you're young. Your mind is more open to that type of discovery, and there's kind of no excuse not to if you have the wanderlust. You can always, and this is what I did. When I decided that I was going to go, which I made that decision in November of 1989 when all of the revolutions were happening, and I had a job that was going to carry that I had a contract for until June of the next year. I'm like, all right, I'll stop spending money at restaurants, and I'll stop buying everyone's beer because I was making money and my friends weren't in college. And I'll just save money for 4 months, 5 months, and use that to spend a one-way ticket and give myself a cushion to go travel. Anyone can do that. Like you don't have to. That doesn't require a whole lot. So, like for those people who are feeling young and curious, and especially those who are like, yeah, I wish I could do that, dude. You can. You totally can. If that's what you decided you wanted to do, and Lord knows, I don't know how you people at all have dealt with pandemic. It's just terrible for people. I mean, it's terrible for everybody, but I can't imagine how bad it is for people exactly your age. I know parents and other kids who've had so much trouble. Like, man, my instinct would be just to get the Fletch out of town. But then again, the pandemic is everywhere, so I suppose it's not very easy to escape. But yeah, go visit the world. You're young. You have legs.
Yeah, I'm excited for everyone to calm down. I mean, because I'm thinking like I don't know what percentage of places are like kind of like calmer now, but Europe is not the place to go. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's
So
bad.
kind of on that line, talking about the exact antithesis of Prague. Let's talk about teachers unions pandemic lockdown schools. You live in New York City or Brooklyn. So let's talk about the public schools there since you write a lot about them.
Sorry.
No, it's great. I enjoy it. So in the city, a lot of private schools and Catholic schools have been doing in-person instruction since September, and I mean it's the same in DC and like in Virginia where I am. And there have been no significant signs of like big outbreaks. However, still today, about 70% of public school students are still only remote, like 100%. And the kids who are back at school are not at school full time. And sometimes they're taught like by kids or with kids that are also remote. And our schools in Arlington, they're the exact same. But can you tell us a little bit about what the situation is like in New York City?
So, beginning May 4th, may the 4th be with us, for the first time since mid March of last year, my youngest daughter's elementary school will be open, they say,
Wow.
5 days a week. We can't believe it. And we're not sure exactly what it's going to look like inside the classroom, but that's supposed to be happening. What it looks like right now, give you just a snapshot of my day today, is that my 6-year-old who's in kindergarten, what is today, Thursday? Oh, she actually went to school today. So she went to school in a school building, which she does 2.5 days a week. The other days, she is part of a pod with 3 other kids there's 2 classes at our local elementary school. It's why we live here, public school, which have a dual language French program because my wife is French, and I want the girls to be able to be taught in French at least half the time while we're in America, especially so that they can easily be bilingual, and they are, and that's great. So there's 4 kids from the 2 classes that do that, and they have a pod, and they have a young woman who helps them shuffle through their remote classes and to just hang out together and to do things in a pod situation at rotating houses. It'll be at our house tomorrow, for example. So, 5 feet from where I am talking to you tomorrow, I will be attempting to write an article about the Armenian genocide, while there will be 4 4-year-olds doing gym class and music class with like bongo drums and stuff over a laptop with their pod leader. Meanwhile, my 12-year-old, who is in 7th grade today, as most Thursdays, was at home. And tomorrow she'll be in school. She goes to class 2 days a week. And probably over the course of this year, the youngest one has been in school on average, because it gets shut down very easily. For a long time, they had a 2 positive case rule. So if a school of 1,000 people, if 2 people in the entire school who are connected with it in any way, shape, or form test positive for COVID, regardless of whether they caught it there or were spreading it there, then the whole school would get shut down for 10 days automatically. They only changed that rule very recently over the objections of the aforementioned teachers unions, who are very bad actors, in my opinion, in all of this. So my youngest daughter's been in school about 1 out of every 3 days on average in this school year. My oldest daughter didn't go to school at all for 4 months. So it's only remote learning. And so she probably, by the end of the year will have gone to maybe 10%, 1 out of 10 days, maybe. And when she's going in person now to her middle school, at least 2 periods a day, there's no teachers. Because so many of the teachers have chosen remote only teaching, even though they all have access to the vaccine now. They just want to stay home. And there's not enough substitutes to go around. So even though the federal government just decided to wash, $122 billion injected into local schools, almost immediately, there's still not enough teachers because they negotiated sweetheart deals for themselves to teach remotely. So I'm happy she goes and just like hangs out with friends in a yard, because that's better than just being penned up at home forever, because you become a creepy shut-in and spend all your time staring at your phone and doing horrifying TikTok dances. I mean, my God, these kids and their TikToks, and they're all doing the stuff with their hands. It's terrible. So like, it's fine, but to have that. But generally speaking, it's been just a wipeout of a year. And part of the really hard thing, 12-year-old, at least our 12-year-old, can kind of govern herself mostly. Hasn't had I would say, a smooth last 15 months. Been a lot of rough patches, for sure. But like, we don't have to mind her. 6-year-olds aren't built that way. Like they absolutely need to be in some kind of structured situation, and especially they need to be with friends and other human beings. They gotta pick the lice out of each other's hair. When you don't have that, and we watched this happen last spring for the 3 months or however it was on like extreme lockdown here. It is so mangling for these little human bots to like be starved for social interaction. I mean, it makes me tear up just thinking about it. So you have this massive uncertainty all the time. Like, school's open 2.5 days a week, unless it's not. And so we're lucky, we're smart. We're lucky to have the wherewithal to organize a pod. And so that pod, and then we did it. And so that pod has been able to absorb all of this uncertainty. But we know so many people who just like, I can't deal with this. And so people are moving back to Europe. God help them, because it's really bad, as you know, over there with the pandemic. Or they're moving to Florida, or they're moving to the closest nearby place, whether it's New Jersey or Long Island or Westchester, where the schools are reliably open. And it is amazing to me how much teachers unions have just decided, screw it, we're going to get as much as we can now while the getting's good. And they don't realize how many people are losing the system. I wrote the first data came in recently about fall enrollment for the next school year beginning in fall 2021. And the
Mm-hmm.
number of kindergartners is down, who are applying, is down 12% year over year.
Wow.
And that's after a 9% the year before. And oh my God, that is such a seismic shift in people leaving the system. And from the public school point of view, from a teacher point of view, for people who are like super psyched about public education point of view, that is a catastrophe for them. Yet they have engineered it. It's amazing to me. It's like I keep telling them, like, you realize you people who hate libertarians are enacting libertarianism right now. You've just driven everyone into homeschooling. You've made everyone hate public education and and question tax dollars in a way that they never have before, and hate teachers unions who they never really thought about before. You did all this. I did not. I actually tried to stay in the public system, as much as possible, and to help improve from within. And next year we're taking out the uncertainty. I cannot depend on this city and this school system to be governed by adults that have kids' best interest in mind. And so I'm paying a lot of money next fall so that my youngest daughter can go to a private school that I know is going to be open and is not going to be run by people who do not put their own interests ahead of those of the kids. And it makes me sad, but like, I am so happy to do that, because the uncertainty and the effect that it's had, on especially my wife's ability to work, it's profound. It's such a time suck, and you're way too much of your active brain power has been spent on this. I just want to like set it and forget it.
Yeah, I mean, so first we only went back about a month ago and we only go 2 days a week. And we have 4 days total of school a week. So we don't even have 5 days like virtual. We have 4 days virtual, and 2 of those days are, some people are in person. It's like 4 kids per class. And a lot of the teachers are still home. So you're in the school, but there's no teacher. And then you're like, why did I come here to do online school in the school with no teacher? And then, like, at lunch, we have to sit like 10 feet away from each other. So it's like more depressing than being at home alone. So, there's that. But we seniors only have 2 whole months of school, going to school twice a week. And so it's kind of ridiculous. It's like, why do we even come back? Well, because this is all they gave us. And I tried really hard to switch schools. I wanted to go to a private school that was open because I was losing my mind. But
Yeah.
I needed to get my IB diploma, my like international diploma, to like get into college or whatever. So I stayed, but I don't know if I look back at this, I don't know if it was worth it really. I don't
Yeah.
know, but I'm here now. It's kind of almost over, so that's fine. Um,
The best thing is just that, like, in the long run, none of it matters, I suppose, right? Like, or like, it's not. It matters a lot, but like, it's not going to derail your life. It's just that you got face to face with how really crushingly stupid adults are. Now you are one too, so you can be crushingly stupid yourself. But like, it's awful. But you'll still be able to do whatever the hell that you want to.
yeah, and it hurts me for kids that are younger than I am because I know that I'm fine. But kids that are developing, it bothers me so much, and we'll get to that. But first, what is the role of teachers unions in this? Just kind of, can you outline that situation and kind of how they played into the reason why schools are like this right now?
Yeah. So if you look at, there's a great service website called Burbio, Burbio, that tracks school reopening and opening and how much is hybrid and how much is remote. And they vary it on district and county and state level. And they're not the only ones who look at this, but they have, I think, some of the best data. It's overwhelming that the single biggest factor of whether a state or a district or whatever locality is going to be mostly open or fully open in person or fully remote is partisan politics. It is for example, the 10 most open states in terms of K through 12 are all run by Republican governors. They all voted for Trump. I think maybe one of them has a Democratic governor. 9 out of 10. They all voted for Trump. They all have Republican run legislatures. And if you look at the 10 most closed systems, they all voted for Biden. 9 out of the 10, Maryland being the exception, have Democratic governors, and they all have Democratic legislatures. Everyone who's looked at this have come to this. It has nothing to do with the level of infection of the pandemic or the mortality or any of that. It is partisan politics. People have looked at it and said it's the biggest factor is how much they hated Trump. That's one finding. And then also the strength of the teachers unions. So teachers unions, the American Federation of Teachers, the National Education Association, they are, as a category, one of the biggest spenders of political dollars in the country. It's a very big. This is public school teachers unions. So, and 94% of the money that they spend on politics through lobbying and donations goes to Democratic politicians and Democratic parties. 19 out of $20 goes to Democrats. So in places where the teachers unions have the most sway, they tend to be the most Democratic places. And they tend to elect politicians, go figure, that have the most sense of favors to give to teachers unions. So look at all the biggest cities that have been the slowest in reopening. It's places like Chicago, Illinois, Los Angeles, California. New York was held up as a model because it sort of opened up, half opened earlier, but in many ways, as I've written a lot about, that was deliberately misleading. And so that's it. It's where it's where they have the most power. And when a teachers union has a lot of power, think about what that means. So they are able to influence the election of politicians who are favorable to them. Joe Biden's wife is a member of the National Education Association, and on her literal first day in the White House, maybe it was the second day, but no later than the second day, she had the heads of the two biggest teachers unions in the White House. Randy Weingarten from AFT has been at the White House at least 4 or 5 times already in the Biden administration, and had her fingerprints on the Center for Disease Control's guidance towards schools, which when they first came out were very favorable for her point of view. But on a local level, which is where education policy is set, teachers unions negotiate salaries and working conditions with local politicians who they helped elect. So it's not hard to see what's wrong in this picture here. And that pattern also develops in, let's say, more Republican areas with not teachers unions, but with firefighter unions and police unions. So you have the politicians that public sector unions sit down and then make these sweetheart salary negotiations, and especially pension negotiations, work condition negotiations with their hand-picked or favorite politicians. There's a reason why Franklin Delano Roosevelt said way back in the day that he didn't think it was a good idea to even have public sector unions because there's a basic conflict of interest there where there isn't a representative of the taxpayer at those negotiations. So it's really because of that. The places where the unions are strongest, the schools are the most closed, period. And that is hard to accept. And yet it is also totally true. And I think that you beginning to see some of the teachers unions, just with their public messaging, realize that they have a bit of a public relations problems on their hands. So they're trying to portray themselves like, no, we've been fighting to open schools since last April. You lying sack of not untruths. Yeah. They've been saying that. So they know that they need to sound like that, but people, there's 55 million K through 12 kids in this country. And the parents of those kids in places that have gone through this, I know so many, it's been like progressive Democrats. I live in a super Democratic place, and man, are they mad at teachers unions and the Democrats who enable them right now. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I remember at the beginning, I was like, just kind of like very angry. And I was like, if they don't want to go back to school, they should be fired. And all my friends were like, no, that's insensitive. They should have their jobs. It's a hard time. But now they're like, if they don't want to come back, fire them. And I'm like, see, you came around. Like, it's bothersome because I don't know. I'm assuming it's the same in the city. But in Arlington, teachers were prioritized like almost like first for vaccinations. And then we didn't go back to school for like a really long time after, not a really long time, like a month or two. But then also people who were at grocery stores couldn't get vaccinated before the teachers. And
Yeah.
then these teachers would go to Disneyland and stuff. And then they'd post it on Facebook, and everyone in Arlington was like pissed off because why did you post that? Like, you could at least keep it as, like, you just don't, you're just not smart for doing that. But it just, what are their arguments? I mean, I know they're like trying to put on this like show, but like, what are their arguments, especially like the unions and the teachers, for teachers not going back to schools?
It's that, hey, look, man, we don't know what these variants are going to look like, and just until we know for sure, and in this place and in that place overseas, we're seeing kids get infected more often, especially people your age. And so, like, it's just too soon, and these buildings are old; they don't have good ventilation. We're just trying to, keep everyone as safe as humanly possible. So, and we're working with our partners and our stakeholders. You've heard the drill. Reality behind the scenes, when they're not talking publicly, when they're talking amongst themselves. Like here, the local union is the United Federation of Teachers. The president of that, Michael Mulgrew, is like fighting to make sure that no one ever finds out how many teachers are vaccinated. That's a weird thing, isn't it? He's
That's
like,
sketchy.
I'm fighting for your privacy rights. Well, okay, I like privacy rights too, but I also don't like to hear about. I mean, these are public employees, and like my kids so far are not eligible to be vaccinated. The older one will be at some point, but the younger one won't. I want them to be vaccinated, the teachers who are in there. And by God, do I not want to hear them say that they're scared to go in and teach if they have access to the vaccination and have chosen not to get it, which is a thing that exists in the world, and they're trying to hide that information because they know they can see everyone's blood pressure rising just contemplating it. Yeah, that's what they are protecting their own. They're talking about, like, well, we haven't cleared this latest guidance with our scientists, who they never name who those scientists are, and like on the rare occasion that they even link to anything, it is some of the worst cherry picked science. And I'm not an epidemiologist, but I can tell when something is super crappy, and like the stuff that they link to is really, really lousy on this, because the science has been pretty overwhelming since at least last July, and arguably since last May, that kids aren't catching it, then they're not spreading it, and school sites are not spreader sites. I mean, you referenced before the Catholic and private schools and how it's not really leading to. We would have heard about that. My God, there are so many people incentivized to absolutely over dramatize school settings as being super spreader events in the making. In fact, that's an actual quote in a union ad that aired last September, I think it was. So yeah, they've been working really hard to open the schools by mislabeling schools as possible super spreader locations. That doesn't seem to work. Yeah, it is very frustrating, kind of radicalizing for a lot of people. And it's going to have a profound, I think, long-lasting impact on the way that public education is administered and talked about in the United States, in a way that will, in the long term, really damage the very teachers' unions who are doing the most to make it happen.
I mean, you say it's radicalizing, and I feel that. I mean, I feel like I'm already, people are like, "You're such a radical," but like, I my blood like boils when they're like, "No, you can't sit there. That's 1 foot too close," but it's like 10 feet away, and I'm like, "How is that? How does that make sense?" I'm just like wondering what people are going to like believe and how they're going to act in reaction to this when they kind of don't have grounds for this. But I mean, speaking of not having grounds for this, the regulation from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention is their thing is 3 feet. They switched it from 6 to 3, but my school is still following 10 to 6, which is already 4 more.
My God.
How do they get away with that? How is it that teachers unions get away with putting out that sort of information and also saying that, and kind of pushing their stuff, but also not following the rules the rules that are set out by, and like guidelines that have been set out by the government that they are like pushing around. I don't know. Just
This this is this is a little rude, but you're an adult now. There's an old saying like, "Why does a dog lick itself in the private bits?" It's like because it can. It can. It can do it. So you're going to do it. And that's I think really been that their approach. I mean, they were pushing for a really long time. Like, okay, we're not going to sign off on reopening until we get the Joe Biden CDC to follow the science and to really do some really good work on the guidelines, insert parentheses, which the unions were going to help write themselves. And so when those guidelines came out in February, shockingly, at least in terms of people who, still have slim faith that a governmental science body should actually follow science and not reflect the input of stakeholders. Shockingly, they said, "Oh, we're going to keep that 6-foot distance guidance," even though the very head of the CDC, Rochelle Walensky, when giving advice to a school district in Massachusetts in the previous July, said, "Yeah, just 3 feet's fine. That's enough. That's 6 feet. It's going to cause you to close too many schools and run half time, and that's no good for kids. And there's not really a significant difference. Go for 3 feet." So she had to come out and very insincerely explain why 6 feet was still important. And not only that, but like the guidelines were written in such a way that talked about community spread. Like if the community has X amount of testing, then it's too dangerous to open full time. And at the time that they issued that guidelines, that would cover 90% of public schools. And so what you saw, fascinatingly, was a lot of states are like, you know what? Screw the CDC. We're gonna issue our own guidelines. And I'm not just talking about Florida, which is going to do that anyways, but Illinois and Massachusetts, places that are heavily Democratic strongholds, but they couldn't maintain the straight face about it anymore. So to kind of answer your question, like you do it while you can get away with it, but increasingly there's enough pushback by journalists and scientists. Like when the CDC came out with that lousy guidelines, they based it on a report by a couple of scientists who just immediately did a piece in the USA Today saying like, yeah, this is garbage. Their interpretation, they're misquoting our results, and their guidelines are catastrophically bad and stupid. And the journalism in straight newspapers, Washington Post, New York Times, was overwhelmingly negative. And within a month, and of course, Randy Weingarten, the head of the AFT, the union was like, "Wow, this is great. We finally got the guidance that we were looking for, and that's why we're going to work with our partners to blah 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 blah." Because yes, she helped write those guidelines. And then after the blowback, a month later, 6 weeks later, maybe they reverse it and go to 3 feet, which the entire rest of the world had gone to a long time ago. And suddenly the union's like, "Oh, I don't know. That seems a little bit rushed. We're going to have to look at our experts are going to come back." So they will just do as much as they can get away with. And part of my motivation for writing about this, yes, I'm an angry parent, but also it really bothers me when people stare into the camera in a position of power and influence and lie. And that's what they've been doing. And so have a lot of the politicians that are bending the knee towards them. And that's intolerable to me. So I want to help people on their journeys of discovery about what the difference is between the science and what politicians are doing. And the part of that, as we mentioned before, is pretty radicalizing. I mean, so many people are like, I never thought I would be, a lifelong Democrat. I've never thought I'd be so mad at the Democratic Party right now. And the unions that support them, but I can't believe that they pushed our faces in it this badly and still do it. I mean, there's still quite a few major city school districts, and this probably happened in Arlington too, because you guys have had one of the worst. We're like, yeah, I'm not sure we're going to be open in fall. We're going to need to have
still part remote, I think.
Oh my God, it's the
Yeah.
fall.
Yep.
Like we're
And
we're
we're all
vaxxed
gonna
up.
be. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I
It's
think
time to
something
party.
they're not entirely sure, but they think right now more than 50% of the people in the school building. So not only the teachers, because there are way fewer teachers than there are kids, even when we're like hybrid. Um, that means that like a ton of the kids are also vaccinated that are coming into school. So if that's how it is now, how is it going to be in the fall? You no longer have an excuse. Sorry, I think you've already stretched it way past its like expiration date, but I don't know. And I mean, the hygiene theater is just crazy. So like we have temperature checks and they wipe down the surfaces every like 20 seconds and we have to wipe down the surfaces before and after we leave. And there's like plexiglass around every desk, which is like completely ridiculous. Like science has said no, that's like we've known for a
It can
year that wiping
can
down
make it
surfaces.
worse.
Yeah, it's frustrating. And my mom has to fill out a survey every morning to be like, yeah, my kid will stay 10 feet apart, will not touch surfaces. My kid doesn't have a fever. My kid doesn't have this. But then they still check our temperature and all that stuff. And I'm guessing it's similar in New York City and just in a bunch of other places. Um, but I don't know
And
if you've read the latest piece by John Tierney in the City Journal, and he talks about how younger kids are like facing the consequences of this and how keeping them in masks and also adopting behaviors that are like COVID friendly and all this stuff, like they're talking about the damage that it does to their development. And so I don't know, what do you think the risk of these like hygiene theatrics will be for, I mean, not only like people that are older, I mean, we all realize it's like whatever, we're going to move on, but kids that are younger that are growing up and are thinking that this is completely normal and this is just how the world is.
I'm lucky enough. My 6-year-old is a bit of a feisty critter, and she talks very much like, when is coronavirus going to be over? And because she's tired of all of it. She wears the mask. She does what is required of her, and has never been troubled by that. But she hates the masks. She wants to be able to see her friends and play with them normally. And um and we're just in the last couple of days, and Robbie Suave has written about this reason quite a bit. You've seen kind of like a big shift. A lot of Washington Post, New York Times, Slate are saying, hey, you know what, maybe we shouldn't be wearing masks outdoors. Maybe that's pointless. And hopefully that's going to be translated soon into like, maybe we shouldn't be having 6-year-olds wear masks indoors. Which is the norm in much of the country, but like in these awful places that we have all decided to live, which are in fact great places, but they're governed very awfully. There is all that hygiene theater. So I don't think that she's going to be too mangled for that. She strains the leash. And the moment it's over, it's going to be super over for her, and she's going to get back to making out with all the 6-year-old boys, even 5-year-old boys. She's a bit of a cougar when it comes to that. And she's going to be super happy. But yeah, there's a lot of people who are going to learn a certain amount of fear. You think about, so my 6-year-old is 6 years and 3 or 4 months old. Right. So we can 75 months. So 15 of her 75 months, 20% of her life have been under COVID. That's weird,
ridiculous. That's so
right?
weird.
It's really weird. And it's like also a majority of her pretty, self-conscious life, where she can read and process information in a certain way. And if she was different temperamentally, man, of course that's going to have a huge development impact on you. Even the couple of months where she didn't have any social interaction, like it just so obviously was terrible for her. It's terrible for all of us, but really, really terrible for her. And she bounced back, but like it took a while. Like she forgot how to act. But for people, there's going to be a whole class of people, and probably especially adults, who come out of this as just kind of like lifelong germaphobes who like have forgotten the ability to weigh risks. I mean, most people don't realize at all that, for people 18 years and younger, by far the flu has been more deadly than COVID. Like they don't understand that. They can't do that. And so if they process that at all, like, okay, cool. So let's mask up after COVID's gone because the flu is so terrible. Like people have freaked out on risk, and the media has been really unhelpful through a lot of this. I am afraid to report. Just like looking for anecdotal scare stories in a field where there's actual better broad data. And granted, it's very uncertain and things change and it's seasonal and it's geographical and all this, but we try to shove all of this political morality into it. So if you're from New York, you've been sneering at Florida and Texas until recently, quite a lot. And all these people who don't wear masks and they're anti-science and no one wants to confront a reality that maybe public policy hasn't been the main driver of whether you get it and whether you suffer from it in a particular place. And that therefore there's some conclusions that you might come there, including a certain amount of humility in the way that you deal in the world. But it's impacted people really, really badly. The economics of it is terrible, especially again in Democratic-run states. The employment, so many women lost their jobs. It's been a female recession, basically because schools are closed, and it became too difficult to figure out and plan out childcare for school-aged kids, and women still bear the brunt of child rearing duties, whether we like that or not. That's just how it is. And if you're a single mom or someone who's a poorer single mom, my God, it's catastrophic. The labor force participation rate among women is back to where it was 40 plus years ago. That's an amazing backslide, and that might take many years to recover from. And really galls me is that, like, this old joke about, the New York Times headline of, if an asteroid comes and destroys the Earth or a country on the Earth, it would say poor and minorities hardest hit. But in this case, that's really the case, specifically of the strategies that were embraced and adopted by Democratic politicians. And I'm not a Republican, so I don't like this finding. But those things have hurt most of all women and poorer people, poorer minority students. They are the ones who absolutely got mangled because of public policy choices that were not related or at least not correlative at all with the amount of COVID in the community. And it's horrifying. So I hope that John Tierney is wrong. It's always bad to bet on that. This has to have some kind of impact. But then again, people have pointed out how one of the things about the Roaring Twenties that made it the Roaring Twenties is that people like, screw it, let's forget about the great influenza that just killed our sister. And they went out and it's as if it didn't happen. So hopefully we have some kind of regenerative ability to scrub out the bad memories and not let it impact us. But I do worry about it.
That's pretty optimistic. My biggest hope is that as more numbers come out and like as we get farther from this, that people can look back and see the numbers and be like, wait, that the numbers actually had no influence upon our policy decisions. That's crazy. I don't know how much that's going to happen, but I think more and more as we get farther from it, people are and more frustrated with being stuck like in this weird time. I think people are going to realize that, I hope. And another thing on child behavior, your daughter definitely so strong, especially compared to people that I've been reading about. I've been reading these stories and kids like cry when strangers cross the street because they don't understand COVID, but they also don't understand that it's not them. They are not the problem. But then they get accustomed to it and they're scared of people. And so it's just like awful, and I hope that that's like not the majority of kids. I doubt it is, but like I bet a lot of kids are at least minorly influenced by this in that way, and I just hope that somehow the damage that has been done can be reversed or that it's not as big as it seems like it is now.
Yeah, I just to add quickly, I've seen my friends from California, adults, that their personalities have changed a little bit. Their appetite for risk is all like perquacky. They're really fearful. They'll drive by and see people outdoors at a beach and go, "Oh, look at those people." It's like, dude, no, look at those people and rejoice. Be one of those people. But like, because California was so strict on its lockdowns, it just, people got into this cycle where they are way more fearful than people in New York, even though New York was the epicenter, New York City, the epicenter of the pandemic. So it's got to affect behavior. And I do worry about that. Maybe one of the reasons why it's that at least my daughter or some people in New York are not completely mangled is that we're just so on top of each other anyway that you don't have
Yeah.
the option. Like, if you're going to go outside your house, you're going to see people. You cannot be a creepy shut in New York City. So
Yeah.
hopefully that will help. But yeah, I worry about it too.
I mean, California is like freaking another place. Some of the amount that universities in California are still shut down compared to places on the East Coast or even more crowded places like just anywhere else in the country, it's fascinating. I mean, fascinating in a very negative way. Okay. Thank you so much for all of this. I know I've taken so much of your time, but I want to wrap up with this final question. What is one thing you believed at one time in your life that you later changed your position on and why?
Um, this actually is a proximity to reason, and I think probably specifically Nick Gillespie more than anybody else. I used to believe pretty strongly that one of the overwhelming factors of politics and governance that made it unsatisfying and made for bad policy and governed decisions was the role of campaign contributions. And that therefore I was attracted to people um, who decried that, which was Jerry Brown when he ran for president in 1992. It was Ralph Nader when he made his subsequent runs for president, one of which I covered in 2000. And I thought that campaign finance reform it was important, that the objections to it on free speech grounds were frivolous and opportunistic, and that once they were taken away, then policies X, Y, and Z would tumble forth. And I was wrong. I was persuaded first by talking to Brad Smith, who used to be on the Federal Elections Commission, and he's been involved in advocacy on this issue for a long time. And I found it to be very persuasive, interviewing him about this, and including just like the size of contributions compared to the size of other things and lobbying and whatnot. And then understanding more about how politicians and businesses respond to incentives, and seeing the locus of decisions happen elsewhere, and also like understanding how individual politicians make decisions about things which are widely portrayed as, oh, he's caving to X lobby, but knowing the issue, whatever that might be, just having some exposure to all of that led me to a kind of the opposite point of view, that campaign finance restrictions inevitably require censorship. They require disclosing some activity that should probably be allowed to be private, and that at any rate, the effect on actual policymaking is much more marginal than we normally associate with. If you want to look at some actual effect on policymaking, it's usually what lobbyists do to the omnibus bill at the end of legislative year at the last minute that nobody reads. That will have more to do with it, or promulgating rules at an agency. And this is outside the kind of high profile realm of campaign competition and politics. So I believed that strongly once, and now I believe something closer to the opposite. And it was exposure to crazy libertarians and Reason Magazine in particular that changed my mind about that.
I mean, I'm not super well informed on that sort of stuff. I mean, I also just money and financial things are just complicated for me and my brain. But I have been realizing more and more just how big a role incentives play in everything, really, even in your day-to-day life, and you just don't realize that. So I can imagine how that plays a role in that situation. Um, okay. that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank you again, Matt, for your time and for your insight. I would also like to thank everyone who listens, subscribes, and shares the Great Antidote podcast. If you would like to be on the podcast or if you have a guest in mind, please feel free to reach out to me at thegreatantidote@thecgo.org. Bye, and thank you.